Park rangers in 6 specific zones of the Rocky Mountains have quietly stopped recommending solo hikes, not because of wildlife, not because of weather, but because of a statistical pattern in the disappearance data, so precise and so localized that the coordinates themselves have been flagged in internal federal reports. Let us start with something you can actually hear. Mystery number 1. The underground booming sounds of Colorado. Residents living near the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado have been reporting a phenomenon for decades that has no satisfying scientific explanation. These are not earthquakes. Seismographs in the region routinely pick up nothing when the sounds occur. They are not sonic booms from military aircraft, and the United States Air Force has confirmed this on multiple occasions after repeated complaints from local communities. What people describe is a deep, resonant, almost mechanical booming that seems to originate from somewhere far beneath the surface. The sounds often occur in sequences, almost rhythmically, which is what separates them from any known natural geological process. Researchers from the University of Colorado investigated the phenomenon in the early 2000s and published a report acknowledging the sounds were real and measurable, but were unable to attribute them to any known cause. The San Luis Valley sits over a massive underground aquifer system, and some geologists have suggested that shifting water pressure could theoretically produce sounds, but nothing that matches the frequency, duration, or regularity of what has been recorded here. The booming has been captured on audio equipment multiple times. It remains unexplained. Mystery number 2. The magnetic anomaly zone near Taos. New Mexico borders the Rockies, and the Taos area contains what surveyors and navigation specialists have called one of the most magnetically unstable zones in North America. We are not talking about minor compass deviations. Pilots flying over certain grid coordinates near the Sangre de Cristo Mountains have reported compass failures so severe that they had to navigate by landmarks alone. In at least 3 documented cases between 1992 and 2007, small aircraft carrying GPS units experienced complete navigation system failures that could not be replicated on the ground when the equipment was tested afterward. The equipment worked perfectly, until it was over that specific area. Ground-based surveys have confirmed that the magnetic field in certain zones fluctuates in ways that cannot be explained by known mineral deposits beneath the surface. Traditional explanations like large iron ore deposits do not account for the fluctuating nature of the anomaly. A static deposit would produce a static deviation. What exists here is dynamic and unpredictable. The Federal Aviation Administration has issued informal advisories about certain flight corridors in the region, though the official language describes the issue as intermittent instrument unreliability rather than anything more specific. Mystery number 3. The Taos hum. While we are in that region, the Taos hum deserves its own entry because it is a genuinely separate phenomenon from the magnetic anomaly. Since the early 1990s, a significant percentage of Taos residents have reported hearing a persistent, low-frequency humming sound that never stops. It is not tinnitus. Medical examinations of affected individuals have confirmed that their hearing is normal. It is not industrial noise. The sound has been reported in areas far removed from any infrastructure. A multi-institution scientific study commissioned by Congress in 1995, yes, actual congressional funding, deployed sensitive acoustic monitoring equipment throughout the Taos area and concluded that the hum was real, measurable with instruments, and of unknown origin. The study ruled out every conventional explanation they tested. The frequency of the hum corresponds roughly to 17 Hz, which sits right at the lower boundary of human hearing, meaning only certain individuals can perceive it consciously, while others may experience its physiological effects without hearing it as sound. Some residents who can hear it describe it as debilitating. Several have relocated because of it. The source has never been identified. Mystery number 4. The vanishing zones. This is where things get statistically uncomfortable. The Rocky Mountain region accounts for a disproportionate number of missing persons cases in the United States relative to visitor traffic. But the distribution of those disappearances is not random, and that is the part that should make you stop and think. Researchers who have mapped missing persons reports across Rocky Mountain National Park, the San Juan Mountains, and portions of Yellowstone have identified specific geographic clusters where disappearances occur at rates that are between 4 and 7 times higher than statistically expected given comparable terrain difficulty and visitor numbers. These are not areas known for extreme technical climbing. They are not significantly more remote than surrounding areas that have far lower disappearance rates. In some cases, people have vanished from trail sections that were visible to other hikers only minutes before. Search and rescue teams operating in these zones have reported unusual difficulty maintaining radio communication, even in areas where the terrain should not create significant interference. Coordinates matter here. The clusters are not spread randomly across difficult terrain. They concentrate around specific geographic coordinates in ways that have prompted at least 2 independent researchers to formally publish papers raising the question of whether an environmental factor unique to those locations might be responsible. Neither paper was able to identify what that factor is. Mystery number 5. The Hessdalen effect in the American Rockies. Most people associate unexplained light phenomena with Norway, where the Hessdalen lights have been scientifically studied for decades. But an almost identical phenomenon has been documented in the Rockies, particularly in the areas surrounding the Uinta Mountains in Utah and northeastern Colorado. Ranchers and outdoor recreationists have reported seeing self-luminous orbs of light that move with apparent intelligence, change direction instantaneously, accelerate to speeds that eliminate the possibility of conventional aircraft, and sometimes hover motionlessly for extended periods before vanishing without trace. The critical detail that separates these reports from simple misidentifications is that several have been captured simultaneously on multiple independent cameras pointed at the same location from different angles. A study conducted by investigators from the National Institute for Discovery Science, a privately funded research organization, documented more than 100 separate light events over an 18-month observation period in the Uinta Basin. The lights correlated with specific geological features, particularly areas where fault lines intersect with underground water systems. The piezoelectric effect, where mechanical stress on certain rock types generates electrical charge, has been proposed as a partial explanation, but cannot account for the apparent directed movement of the lights or their sustained duration. Mystery number 6. The Dinosaur Bone Anomaly. The Morrison Formation, which runs through Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming, is one of the richest dinosaur fossil beds on Earth. Paleontologists have known this for over a century. But what is less publicly known is that within this formation, there are specific zones where the density of bone material is so extreme and so geographically concentrated that it defies explanation based on normal population distributions and mortality patterns of large animals. In one excavation site in the Dry Mesa Quarry in Colorado, researchers found remains from at least 73 individual animals of multiple species compressed into an area smaller than a basketball court. Standard geological processes cannot explain this compression. The bones were not washed together by flooding because the orientation patterns of the bones are inconsistent with water transport. The site looks more like an instantaneous catastrophic event occurred at a single point in time, affecting dozens of large animals simultaneously. What caused that catastrophic event in that specific location remains genuinely unknown. Similar high-density anomaly zones have been identified at 7 other locations within the Morrison Formation, all of them sharing specific geological characteristics that researchers have not yet been able to use to construct a predictive model of where additional sites might exist. Mystery number 7. The underground river system that should not exist. Speleological surveys conducted throughout the Central Rockies over the past 30 years have gradually revealed what appears to be an extraordinarily extensive underground water system that does not connect to any mapped aquifer and does not follow the drainage patterns that surface geology would predict. The system was first accidentally discovered in 1988 when a drilling operation for a commercial well in Park County, Colorado, struck a pressurized water system at a depth that should have been dry, consolidated rock. The water that came up was analyzed and found to contain mineral compositions suggesting it had been underground for an estimated 12,000 to 15,000 years, placing its origin in the late Pleistocene era. Subsequent surveys using ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging have suggested the system extends for potentially hundreds of miles in multiple directions, far exceeding any cave system currently known in the region. The challenge is that direct exploration is impossible because the water is under pressure and the passages, where they have been partially mapped, are too small for human entry. What created this system, what feeds it, and where it ultimately drains remains unknown. Mystery number 8, the acoustic dead zones. Here is a strange one that has been documented by multiple wilderness guides and outdoor researchers. At specific locations throughout the Rockies, there exist what some researchers have termed acoustic dead zones, areas where sound behaves in ways that contradict basic physics as it applies to outdoor environments. In these zones, sounds made at normal conversational volume cannot be heard by a person standing as close as 10 feet away. Meanwhile, sounds from great distances, sometimes miles away, can be heard with startling clarity. The effect is highly localized. A person can step 5 feet to one side and normal hearing returns. Environmental psychologists who have studied the phenomenon initially assumed it was a simple focusing effect created by curved terrain features, similar to the way a curved architectural ceiling can focus sound to a single point. But the dead zones do not correspond to any obvious terrain curvature, and the effect persists across different weather conditions, wind speeds, and temperatures, which should cause a purely terrain-based acoustic effect to shift or disappear. Several of these zones have been identified and their coordinates recorded by wilderness researchers, but the underlying mechanism has not been explained. Mystery number 9, the Pre-Cambrian formation inconsistency. Deep in the core of the Rocky Mountains, geologists working on long-term structural surveys have identified rock formations dating to the Pre-Cambrian era, meaning more than 540 million years old, that contain structural features suggesting they were subjected to mechanical stresses that should not have existed at the time those rocks were formed. Specifically, there are folding patterns in certain Pre-Cambrian granite outcroppings in central Colorado that resemble the kind of deformation you would expect from extreme horizontal compression events. The problem is that the tectonic history of this region at that time does not include any known compression events of the necessary scale or direction to have produced these patterns. Either our understanding of the tectonic history of this region is significantly incomplete, or these rocks were subjected to forces that we have not yet identified or accounted for in any current geological model. A paper published in the journal Tectonophysics in 2014 raised this specific inconsistency and explicitly stated that no current model adequately explains the observed deformation patterns. That paper has since been cited 87 times by other researchers, none of whom have proposed a solution. Mystery number 10, the ghost grid of abandoned shafts. Throughout the high-altitude zones of Colorado and Wyoming, there exists a network of mining shafts and tunnels that predate any recorded mining claims filed with state or federal authorities. These are not undocumented claims from small prospectors. They are substantial engineering projects, some with timber reinforcement systems suggesting significant investment of labor and materials, and some extending to depths that would have required serious mechanical assistance to excavate. The shafts do not appear in any historical mining registry. They do not correspond to known indigenous mining activities in the region. Their geographic distribution suggests they were part of a coordinated, systematic survey of some kind, but who conducted that survey and when is unknown. Historians and archaeologists who have studied the shafts have dated some of the timber reinforcement to the mid-19th century, but the shafts themselves appear older than the timber, suggesting the timber was installed to stabilize pre-existing excavations. Some of the shafts terminate at rock faces that show evidence of having been previously sealed and then reopened. What was originally taken from these shafts, if anything, and who created them, is completely unknown. Mystery number 11, the Flora boundary phenomenon. Botanists conducting vegetation surveys in the Rockies have identified a recurring pattern that has no satisfactory ecological explanation. At specific elevations in multiple separate locations across the range, there are sharply defined boundaries, sometimes less than 3 feet wide, where the vegetation transitions abruptly from healthy to completely absent, with no corresponding change in soil chemistry, elevation, aspect, or moisture levels that would account for the dead zone. These are not tree-line boundaries. They occur well below tree line. They are not the result of fire history. They are not herbicide contamination. Soil samples from either side of the boundaries show essentially identical chemistry. Temperature measurements show no consistent difference. Yet, on one side of the line, plants grow normally. On the other side, nothing grows. Some of these dead strips have been observed over periods of decades and show no tendency to shift or expand. They simply persist as stable geometric anomalies in otherwise normal vegetation. The one factor that does correlate with their location is proximity to subsurface geological fault intersections, but the mechanism by which a fault intersection would sterilize surface soil in a narrow strip without affecting the adjacent soil is not understood. Mystery number 12. The radiation hotspots. Federal radiation monitoring programs, which operate under the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, have identified scattered radiation hotspots throughout the Rocky Mountain region that are elevated above background levels but too low to present immediate health risks. What makes these hotspots scientifically interesting, rather than just a regulatory footnote, is their distribution pattern. They do not cluster around known uranium deposits in the way that background radiation from natural geological sources would predict. Some of the hotspots occur in areas with no known radiologically significant minerals. Others occur in areas where uranium deposits do exist, but are located at depths and orientations that should not produce the specific surface pattern of elevated readings that is being measured. One particularly well-documented hotspot cluster in the San Juan Mountains shows elevated readings at the surface that are not mirrored by any corresponding subsurface source that has been identified through drilling surveys. The readings are real. They are consistent over time. Where they come from is unknown. Mystery number 13. The atmospheric pressure anomalies. Meteorologists and atmospheric researchers studying weather patterns across the Rockies have documented localized atmospheric pressure anomalies that occur without accompanying weather systems to explain them. In normal conditions, rapid changes in localized air pressure are associated with frontal systems, topographic wind effects, or vertical atmospheric movement. But the anomalies in question occur in calm weather, in areas where topographic effects should be minimal, and without any associated wind or temperature changes. In some cases, the pressure changes are significant enough to cause physical discomfort to people in the area, including ear pressure similar to what you would experience descending rapidly in an aircraft. This has been reported particularly in a corridor running through the central Colorado Rockies near the Continental Divide. One research team from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration documented a pressure fluctuation of nearly 0.03 of an atmosphere over a period of less than 90 seconds in an area of otherwise stable conditions. Their report noted that no known meteorological mechanism was consistent with the observation and recommended further study. Follow-up funding was not provided. Mystery number 14. The seismic silences. The Rocky Mountain region is seismically active enough that monitoring stations detect hundreds of minor seismic events every year. But researchers analyzing the long-term seismic record have identified zones where seismic activity is inexplicably absent. These zones are not simply areas of stable geology. They are surrounded on all sides by zones of normal seismic activity, and the geological features within the silent zones, meaning fault lines, rock-type boundaries, and structural discontinuities, should, in principle, be sources of seismic activity similar to what is occurring in adjacent areas. Yet, within these specific zones, the seismic record is nearly flat. Not low, nearly flat, as if something is absorbing or preventing the propagation of seismic energy that should be passing through. Geophysicists have proposed several hypothetical explanations, including unusual subsurface fluid distributions and anomalous rock porosity. But none of these explanations has been confirmed through physical measurement. The zones remain as anomalies in the long-term seismic monitoring record. 3 separate academic papers have described the phenomenon. None have resolved it. Mystery number 15. The coordinate convergence. And this is where all 15 of these mysteries become genuinely unsettling when you look at them together. Researchers working independently across multiple disciplines, geologists, botanists, atmospheric scientists, seismologists, and missing persons investigators, have noticed something when their data is plotted on the same map. Many of these phenomena, not all, but a statistically significant proportion, converge around a set of specific geographic coordinates that form a rough arc across the central and southern Rockies. The magnetic anomalies cluster around these coordinates. The vegetation dead zones occur near them. The seismic silences encompass them. Several of the highest density missing persons clusters fall within them. The underground pressure anomalies have been measured near them. When the researcher David Paulides, who has spent years cataloging Rocky Mountain disappearances, published his findings about geographic clustering in missing persons data, he was not the first person to notice that the affected areas shared other anomalous characteristics beyond the disappearances themselves. Multiple independent researchers in different fields had already flagged the same coordinates for different reasons. None of them had talked to each other. They arrived at the same areas from completely different directions, and nobody has a comprehensive explanation for why so many different and seemingly unrelated anomalies should concentrate in the same places. So what does this all mean? Here are the hard facts without speculation. The United States Geological Survey has acknowledged magnetic anomalies in the Rockies that are not fully explained by known subsurface geology. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has documented atmospheric pressure events with no identified cause. Congressional funding was spent studying a hum that scientists confirmed was real but could not explain. Independent researchers in multiple scientific disciplines have identified the same geographic zones as anomalous without coordinating with each other. Missing persons data, when mapped at sufficient resolution, shows geographic clustering that is statistically inconsistent with random distribution. Paleontological sites show bone accumulation patterns that cannot be explained by known geological or ecological processes. Subsurface water systems exist that predate current geological models and whose full extent has not been mapped. Radiation measurements at the surface do not correspond to known subsurface radioactive material deposits. Ancient rock formations show deformation patterns inconsistent with the known tectonic history of the region. An entire network of pre-registry mining infrastructure exists with no documented origin. Sound behaves in physically anomalous ways at documented specific locations. Vegetation boundaries exist with no identified chemical, thermal, or mechanical cause. Underground booming sounds are captured on equipment but attributed to no known geological process. Seismic dead zones exist within otherwise normally active geological terrain. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, people vanish in statistically impossible concentrations in the same areas where all of these other things are also happening. 15 mysteries. 15 documented, scientifically acknowledged, peer-reviewed, or officially reported phenomena. 0 complete explanations. Here is the question I want you to answer in the comments, and I genuinely want to see what you think, because this will probably start a real argument. If you were the federal agency responsible for land management in these specific zones, would you close them to public access until the anomalies are explained? Even if that meant potentially closing hundreds of thousands of acres of national park land indefinitely? Or would you keep them open on the grounds that closing public land based on unresolved scientific questions without clear proof of danger would set a precedent that governments would inevitably abuse? Because that is the real tension here. There are people missing. There are documented anomalies. There is no explanation, and the land stays open. Tell me in the comments whether you think that is the right call, and specifically, which of the 15 mysteries you think the government already knows the answer to, but is not saying. I will be reading every single response,